Hello. In the previous video, we actually worked on variables. We went through how to create a variable and we looked at the different kinds of values that you can store in a variable. And then we also went through how you can actually check which kind of variable that you have or you're using. Up until now, everything that we've been doing is we've been printing things onto the screen. That is great and that is amazing. But what if we actually want to get some information from a user? We can do this, which is quite cool. But before we do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new Python file so that we can actually structure our topics. So I'm going to do a new file and I'm going to call this, let's say, user input, for example. So user input.py. Okay. And what we're going to do in user input.py is we are going to ask the user to type something in. Now, it's important to know that every time you ask a user to type something in onto the console, it always returns as a text. So if you get something, you are going to have to convert it into a whatever data type you want to. And that is why I'm here. And I'm going to show you how to do this. Okay. So what we're going to do here is we are going to ask the user for some simple instructions. Okay, so let's get started. So um, to get a user to enter something on from their console, we use a function called input. Okay, so input, and then we can enter what we want the user to see. So for example, we can say, welcome to welcome. Please enter your name. Okay, now when we're going to print this onto the screen, remember, actually we don't need to print onto the screen because we're using an input. It will automatically show up on the screen. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to run it python user input.py. Then I'm going to click on enter. Okay, sorry, it's supposed to be python 3 that I'm using. Python 3 user input.py. Then you can see on my screen it says, welcome, please enter your name. Now let me enter my name. Let's say Emmanuel. Now when I enter my name, nothing happens. Remember that nothing happens because we only ask the user to enter their name. We are actually not storing that information that the user enters anywhere else. So this is where variables now come into play. So here we're going to combine variables and getting user input from the user together, and then we can do something with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable. Okay, so I'm going to create a variable called name equals, and then instead of it being maybe Kofi or Emmanuel or Kwame, what I'm rather going to do is I'm going to capture what the user enters. So I'm going to replace Kofi in a string with the input. And you can do this. Okay, it's possible for you to do this. So in this particular case, when I run Python 3 user input.py and I enter Emmanuel again, it doesn't do anything, but we have actually saved Emmanuel inside the name variable. And now we can print it onto the screen. So then that's when we introduce print, and then we can say name. Now there are different ways of how you can actually print a name onto the screen. As we go on forward, I'm going to show you a different way of how we can actually do it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run this, and I'm going to say Emmanuel. And then you can see it printed out my name because when I captured the information from the user, I printed it onto the screen. We can even go a step further by even doing this. We can say welcome, and then now something for you to know is that with the print function, you can actually print stuff onto the screen using the variable along with some text. Sometimes you can use the plus. If you do things this way, you're concatenating two strings together. It works fine and is okay. But sometimes it's easier to use the comma. Now, when you're printing things onto the screen, sometimes you can also get error at the same time. You just have to know exactly when to use this. So for this particular example, I'm just going to say welcome name. Again, I'm going to run Python user input.py. Python user input.py. And then Emmanuel. And then it says, welcome, Emmanuel. Beautiful. And what I can do is I can also capture the age as well. So I can just make another copy, or I can write it myself. I can say age equals input, and then please enter your age. And then I can print out like this. You are, and then a comma, age, comma, and then start the string again. So in this case, it becomes you are whatever I enter in there, age old. So I'm going to run Python again. Then it's going to say enter your name. I'm going to say Emmanuel, and then your age, of course. I'm going to give 10. And then it says you are 10 years old. Now, this is one way of printing onto the screen. If you also wanted to, you can print it this way. You can use the F string format to format the message. So what I can do is I can just do F, and then I can say hello name, you are age years old. Now, if you do it this way, it makes it easier sometimes for you because you are able to actually see the entire string together, or whatever you're putting together. So sometimes you can do it this way. Some also prefer to use the comma at the same time. Now, this is great. This is amazing. I'm glad that we've got to this stage. But you have to remember that now we've got a name, now we've got an age. But what if we wanted to turn our application into a calculator, for example? Let's try and see if we can do that. So I'm going to comment this code out, and we'll talk about commenting. Actually, we can discuss commenting later on. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to comment out, because I'm using a Mac. If you click on command/, and you highlight a line, it would comment it out. If you are also on Windows, you can do control/, and it will also comment out the code for you. We'll talk about commenting later on. Now, let's say, for example, I wanted to capture two numbers from a user and then put those two numbers together. Well, I can do this also. I can do number one equals enter a number. Okay, so number one equals input enter a number. So that will give me the first number. Then I can also do number two equals enter another number. Okay, then it will give me this. Now it's quite interesting. Then I'm going to do sum equals number one plus number two, and then we can print out the answer on the screen like this. So what we have here is we've created a variable, and that variable captures whatever the user enters the first time. Then the second variable captures what the user enters the second time. And then we are adding those two variables. Now it's important to know that you can actually add two variables together in another variable. So in this particular instance, we've created a variable called sum equals number one plus number two. And we're going to print this out. Now, let's test this out. Enter a number 12, enter another number 12. Have you noticed that we had 1, 2, 1, 2, so 12 and 12? Instead of us getting 24, we ended up getting 1, 2, 1, 2 because remember what I said to you at the start of this video. Anytime you capture something from a user, it returns as a text. So what we're basically doing here is we're actually adding two texts together. What we can do is to change this, we can do this. We can wrap our number 1 into a float number and then our number 2 also into a float number. So we can do this. We can do float and then we can also do float and then do this. Now, somebody may probably ask, why don't we just, let's test it out first and then I will show you something. So I'm going to run this again. And I'm going to say 12 and I'm going to say 12. The reason why it worked this time was because whatever I captured from the user, I have now converted it into a floating number. So now Python can now read it as a floating point number. Somebody will probably be thinking, why didn't you just wrap the sum in a float? If I did that, it wouldn't work because at this particular instance, it's still reading as a string. So if I run it here, it will just print out the number in front of it. I mean, we can try and see. I could be wrong. We can just get rid of this float here. And then we can just do float here. And then we can run it. 12, 12. And then we end up with 1212.0. Remember that Python code runs from the top to the bottom. So when it got here, number 1 and number 2 were still strings which have been put together in the sum. So sumRare is a string and you're converting that string into a floating point. So at this particular instance, it was still a text. So this is how you actually put two numbers together when you are doing a simple calculator application. Now, it's always important that you wrap numeric inputs with an integer or float. Use f strings for a clear output. I think I showed you how to use f string. F string is when you put an f in the printf so that you can actually write the variable in the actual string itself. And then later on, we're going to have a look at try catches. What are some of the don'ts I think you shouldn't do? Well, don't assume that users are going to type a number. Sometimes a conversion can fail. Don't build very long strings with using the plus sign. F strings are much more easier as you go along. And yeah, this is our tutorial on getting a user input.